Ladies and gentlemen, theys and thems, weavers of all races and subclasses, welcome to This Dungeon is Occupied. My name is Illadine, and together with Thorn and Bone Daddy as your hosts, we wish to help you as players and game masters, from the aspiring to the veteran, with questions, ideas, and interviews for your next tabletop role-playing game experience. You walk into a dimly lit room. A table with 7 chairs, 3 on each side with one at its head. Sitting there is a mysterious figure, its face half obscured by the shadow of a hooded cloak. A slow smile becomes visible in the flickering light. It leans forward, handing you a set of strangely shaped stones, and says, "Go ahead, roll initiative." Today we have 2 awesome guests who have come to bestow upon us their tools, tips, and wise thoughts on not only how to become a better DM or story weaver, but also how to make better stories while playing D&D. From the podcast with over 50 episodes, please welcome the co-hosts of How to Be a Better DM podcast, Justin and Tanner. Thanks for coming on, guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Honestly, love to be here. You guys have already been a treat.
Yeah,
Awesome.
that intro is awesome.
Thank you. So one of the big things that I wanted to get into was your podcast. You guys have a sponsor. You guys do. It seems like you sponsor somebody else I saw on Instagram as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about that, Justin?
Yeah, so I'm, and for those of you out there who aren't marketing geeks like me a little bit, this is a little bit in the marketing weeds. But one of the ways to increase podcast listenership is to put ads on podcast players and things like that. You know, and I was like, hey, I could maybe put ads on real live play D&D episodes or podcasts, and that hopefully should be cheaper than just doing it across like Overcast or whatnot. And I had to say the coolest part of that is, you know, reaching out to people like you guys, and also honestly, that's probably the coolest part about the whole D&D community is, you know, you reach out to someone and you're like, hey, collaboration, or can I ask you this question? And just like excitement and, you know, energy comes back to you, and just like, hey, it's so cool that you're here, like awesome that you even exist. It's just really cool. So that's one thing I got to say to the listener.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really fun.
Yeah, it is. And it's definitely a close-knit community once you get out there and actually put yourself out there for it. And I'll just ask some of the basic questions that we tend to ask all of our interview subjects is, how did you find out about D&D? When did you start playing? Age? And just how did you get into this beautiful game?
Sure. Tanner, do you actually want to go first, since I've gone first on everything else?
Yeah, that's fine. So for me, it started basically soon after I started college. I had always heard about D&D before then, but it was around then when I had a lot of my friends and my cousins kind of really get into it as well, which I don't think it's a surprise because they started having money too. And time.
Yeah.
So I found that a lot of them, especially one of my cousins, he was Wesley. He was really big influence to getting me and a bunch of my friends into it, because he would just be like, hey, I've got this thing. And the way he did it was so funny to me, even to today. He would run the Lost Mines of Phandelver for other people, and then be like, how about you guys try it out? And then he would never, DM again, essentially, and it was great because we loved it. And since then, I've played a really good amount of D&D, a lot of different settings, but I still look back and it's just fun, that memory of starting, because it's also new and everything. Yeah, loved it.
Yeah. Justin?
Yeah, so my story is a little bit similar to Tanner. So, gosh, when I was like 10 or 12, you always look for cool fantasy books or even cool picture books, and my older brother, who was so much cooler than me that I could never hang out with him and his friends, he had he had a couple D&D books. One was the Monster Manual, and I don't remember what edition it was, but I know it was like, it looked kind of old and stuff. And I always thought like, wow, this would be so cool to play, but like the numbers seemed really confusing. Fast forward like 10 years, I had a buddy say, hey, you want to come play, a Star Wars RPG game? Because I'm a big Star Wars fan too. And I was like, yeah, cool. Like, that sounds awesome. And he introduced me to that. And then my brother was like, that's like nothing like D&D, right? And I was like, wait, like what do you mean? And he's like, you even roll different dice. And I was like, what? And then he DM'd for me, and from there it just kind of spiraled upward or downward depending on how you look at it.
Yeah. How long have you guys been DMing, or as we like to say, story weaving?
Sure. So I'm actually kind of new to DMing. Like I kind of fell into it because, as a lot of DMs, you don't have a DM, so you're like, well, I guess I'm the only one who's going to do it if I want to play. It's been probably about 2-ish years actually.
Okay.
Which is probably surprising to some of our podcast listeners, because I get messages from people who are like, I've been doing this for 10 years and like, thank you so much for the podcast. And I'm like, what are you guys talking about? Like, you guys know way more than me. So, but that's one thing that I also like about this is, you know, even if you're new or old in the game, you can still give something and you can still learn something, which is also cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it's been about 6 years on and off, but yeah, same, ditto to what Justin said. I think that the great thing about D&D is you can get as into it as you're willing to kind of like binge, you know, which I found that I did as soon as I got into D&D. It was just like, okay, need to know everything, you know?
Yes.
And what about you guys? How long have you guys been DMing or story weaving?
Illadine.
I've been playing for about 16 years now. My first ever session was in 2E with Thaco, and I'm glad I'm out of it. But I've been DMing for off and on about 7 years now, so not too much long. Thorn's the dinosaur here.
Bone Daddy, how long have you been DMing?
I've been DMing for like 4 years, 5 years, 4 years.
Nice.
4 years, maybe. Time has no meaning to me, apparently.
It's a Monday. You're okay.
I've been playing D&D for 32 years.
Yes.
I've been DMing off and on for probably close to 25 of that.
Wow.
I started out in AD&D.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I don't even remember most of it, to be honest. It's been so long since I played it.
Yeah.
I do remember it took a long time to do anything. But yeah, it's a wonderful game, and that's kind of why I'm with these two guys, because they have different types of experience, and they both excel at different parts of the game. So it's really fun to play with both of them, and I love their DMing style. It's really great. So
I'm blushing.
Thanks.
Love
okay,
it.
this will be, well, I'm not going to say it's going to be my last question because it probably won't. Your first characters, tell me if you remember them, tell me who they are, and honestly, how much you loved them. Tanner?
Okay, yeah. So my first was a bard, and I'm forgetting his name, but I know that his whole thing was like he'd perform by doing jokes, and they weren't great, but like I think that I forget which spell it was. It might have been Bane, but like I was like, okay, whenever I use this spell, I'm going to do a bad pun, and that's what it's going to be. And then yeah, I remember that. Aside from that, and that was actually in that Lost Mines of Foundelver whole story, but yeah, I really enjoyed it, and in fact, I think that bards, I like how flexible they are. Just like I'm not the kind of person who likes to, you know, min-max into one specific area. I kind of generalize so much that I become useless, but I kind of enjoy that too, and I find that bards fill that role.
So essentially, you're saying bards are useless, right?
I'm saying that they are so widespread that it's
I'm the
I
same
think
way.
battles, yeah, I think battles could be more effective if you were just like, hey, I'll just be a warrior, just swing away, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone
sure.
needs a distraction, you know.
Exactly.
Okay, Justin, what about you?
Yeah. So I don't remember the name either. I know it was something kind of foppish. And we were playing the Princes of the Apocalypse campaign. My brother was DMing, and he's kind of a hard DM because I remember my character wasn't great, and so I was getting super frustrated. He was a Water Genasi rogue who could basically do nothing. Like I tried to do super charismatic, but even that he was just terrible at. And just I think he died like very early on in the campaign, and then the campaign fell apart because everyone else died too or something. It was tragic, but it happens.
It's very common, actually.
Yeah. So since we're on the subject of the first characters you played, what is your like favorite class like combination that you've played or that you've seen played? Better yet, since we've already talked about characters you've played.
I'll go with this one. I think that Rangers are surprisingly fun because kind of going along with Bard, I find the Rangers have a lot of variety as well. You know, they can be really good at combat, but also if you're feeling a little bit weird, you can have a pet, because why not?
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
Exactly. That's kind of where the Rangers, the one that I'm really kind of leaning into in this moment. That's probably going to change, but yeah, I just love it for its variety and also versatility. Because personally, I've been really into making like campaigns or sessions based around more wilderness kind of survival versus dungeons or towns. And of course, a ranger is great there too, you know, because you got all that survival element. So yeah, that's my answer.
Definitely.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, as far as my answer, I really like artificers, though I haven't had a chance to actually like play one in depth. Every time I do it, it dies. But I think that's more because I have a terrible track record. But I think that's more because I usually tend to go Warforged as well. And anytime I've made a Warforged character, even if they're not artificer, and I've had someone else play them, even they died. So someday I'll do it. But I like those for some reason. I think maybe that's just how I like wish I was in real life. But anyways.
Yeah, mine's wizard, so like they make fun of me.
We don't make fun of you. We just don't see the point.
I'm just like, I just want to cast spells and be really good at shit. I mean, like, leave me alone.
And I'll speak from experience. You're going to change your favorite classes a million times. I used to play nothing but wizards. I'm into more rogues, rangers now, fighters. Very little magic because it just takes so long. So long in battle.
My giant spellbook, like my solid hardcover of magic. So now that we've gotten your favorite like classes and character combinations to play, how do you approach homebrew in your games? Like, do you have any like favorite homebrew ideas or anything along those lines?
Yeah, I'll go first. So one thing that I actually like to do, I'm a huge fan of one-shots. And I found that kind of deploying homebrew content in one-shots is pretty useful because if it sucks, then you don't have to worry about it. You know, you don't have to tell your player, hey, I'm taking this away from you. And if it's not good enough, you can kind of workshop it. One particular kind of homebrew feature that I created was actually for my wife. She plays a rogue, and don't ever play with your wife. I mean, it's fun, but like, just be careful because whenever something bad happens, she literally just got petrified, like her character, and she was like so mad at me. But as a rogue, you all know that like either you hit and you do lots of damage or you miss. And I was like, well, there are some people that don't like that particular like type of play, but they still like to sneak. So I created this feat, and I think I called it Roguish Marksman, where before you roll the first attack, you can, and if you already have sneak attack triggered, like you can use that. You can choose to use this feat, which instead of doing one hit, it kind of splits all of the different dice of your sneak attack into different hits. So it's essentially like super quick fire. And for players who have really bad luck like me, it's a good option too, because that way, if they don't hit the first one, they can try again and again for all the number of dice that they have available in their sneak attack. And, you know, normal dice rules apply, I guess.
I like that. That's super cool.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, while we're on the topic of combat, I was thinking about an episode that you guys talk about making combat fun, especially in D&D 5e. It can be an absolute slog if you have, let's say, 7 players, and if 4 of them are wizards and they have magic items, then you're sitting there and you're like, all right, so what's your dissertation for this 6-second turn? Go ahead. So how, for the listeners, how do you guys do you describe every action that they're doing? Are you more of a story-like RP combat, or is it, hey, let's just get this combat done and move on?
Tanner, you want to go first?
Yeah. I mean, oh man, some combats, if it's just like, especially early in the adventure, it's like, oh, they ran into some bandits or goblins, I'm totally down. After when it's like you're going into a battle and then like you hit a point when you're like, okay, everybody's felt awesome, can we get this over with? At that point I'll kind of fudge it a little bit, right? But otherwise, I mean, the example you gave where it's like, oh, there's a bunch of wizards, I think that there's a few key things you can do to make sure that everybody's being quick but also being interesting. Environmental kind of factors is something I play with a lot, like different traps kind of going off, or different terrain and things like that. But with wizards, something that I found success with some people can't stand it, but other people, I kind of like it when wizards explain the materials they use, like the components for their spells, because like that stuff's there for a reason, and I kind of want to like, it's a good way for wizards to, instead of just being like, hey, lightning bolt, it's like, okay, what are you using, explain that, play it out, tell me what it looks like. And all of those things kind of wrap up to make it so that each individual turn is very like cinematic. And then once I've had enough of that, then it's like, okay, we'll find a way to end this fight quick,
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And Justin?
I think in describing combat, you can honestly kind of take some cues from the movie industry and even TV. My brother, when we were younger, he loved, and because, I was like 2 years younger than him. I have two brothers. This is the other one, not the one that got me into D&D, but, he would always watch Dragon Ball Z. And in Dragon Ball Z, you see them do like thousands of punches, like, and then there's that one big one where they just punch, or in like fight scenes, Jason Bourne, the camera's going like all over the place, and you see a couple things, but then when something like pivotal happens, that's when you really get the good camera angle. I think it's okay to describe combat like that, and also kind of step back from the initiative aspect and help your players understand, yeah, like you're going first, they're going second, but in real life, it's more like you guys are going at the same time, but then these pivotal things happen in kind of this order. And I would say definitely, listener, you need to make sure that pivotal things are well described. So maybe they do 6 points of damage, it's not a big deal, but if they do 6 points of damage and kill whatever they're facing, then that would be a good time to kind of draw out the explanation. You don't have to describe every single time the monk punches someone, because you're going to be there all night. But if the monk punches someone and they fall over dead, then that would be a really cool time to kind of, like Tanner said, help them feel awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that we have all talked about it, off camera as well, but with that combat and describing the pivotal moments, it's kind of interesting if you see, especially as a story weaver, if you see like, oh, okay, this character has 10 hit points left, and that any spell could be the final one or the final punch, or if they don't do maybe they roll all ones on their damage die, you can still kind of lead up to the pivotal moment. Hey, maybe the armor's cracked, maybe there's the last time you punched, maybe his jaw's missing or something. It's kind of it's fun to feel awesome. That's definitely something that as players and even story weavers, we like to. We're here to have fun, right? So there's that. And with that, there was an episode that you guys talked about, and you've talked about it a couple of times, but using minis and maps versus theater of the mind. Justin, you said a really interesting comment to me that I wanted to kind of dive into. You said that minis and maps can have the potential to stunt the ability of a story weaver to describe a scene, because you're using just these visuals. Whatever plastic is on the table, that's what it is. And so I kind of wanted you to talk about that if you could.
Yeah. And it's funny when you said, you made a comment to me, you got me scared there, because I was like, crap, what did I say now? But this kind of idea came from a friend of mine. His name's Sam Olson. He's actually the one who was the game master for the Star Wars RPG that got me into RPG. And his style is very much so theater of the mind. And I think it works for him. For me, it's a little bit harder, because I do like kind of that aspect of, when distance and timing matter, being able to see that in real play. But he did bring up the point, like you said, where we play this game because we want to immerse ourselves, and when you kind of switch to board game mode, you're not really
Right.
immersing yourself. And he's completely right, because when you do use minis and stuff, you don't have to be as specific in your explanations, and you can kind of get lazy. And I find myself kind of like what we were talking about in combat, just getting lazy and being like, you do this much damage next because I have these many people to go through in this round. But when you are doing theater of the mind, I think it's a little bit easier to make sure everyone's turn is a little bit more noteworthy and worthwhile, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Tanner, do you have anything to add?
I think you made a great point right there, Justin. I think that I've found, like, when I homebrew content, my initial thought is, I need to find maps for all of these scenes, essentially, right? Because I think the maps play a big role in people imagining that they're there. And there's so much wonderful art on the internet and like assets and things like that you can find it most often. But I found that in terms of role playing and a lot of the non-combat aspects, like if you have like an actual map with a grid on there, I found that some players don't. I mean, they're a little bit less loosey-goosey, right? They're certainly less, in some cases, less funny, because I enjoy when they're kind of being silly and things like that. And if they're just like, they got to move their mini over to the vendor before they start harassing them, or something like that, then it's like, okay, that's going to happen less often. I think that combat, it's certainly a great place to have a map and to have minis or icons if you're online. But if you're trying to do something a little bit more interesting, maybe every once in a while, don't,
Yeah.
And-
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can add one more thing, I think one of the main reasons I also, bring that up so often is because our mutual friend, Caden Otley, mine and Tanner, he got into D&D on a road trip. And
Nice.
he told me he was driving, and the driver was like, "You guys bored?" And everyone's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Okay, you guys find yourselves this place." And they didn't have any
Nice.
paper, they didn't have any dice. There was almost no rules, but he led them through a story. And I think that's something that really everyone needs to understand, who is like, oh, well, do you use maps or minis, or it doesn't matter. Just freaking get playing a game, make sure everyone's at the table is having fun, and then you can figure out details later.
Yeah, I think it's coming from a kind of a psychological part of it. When we were kids, we had sticks and mud. Like, I mean, we're all older, so we went outside. We didn't play on our phones quite as often as I do now, for sure. But just going out and like, all right, this stick right here, that's my flagpole. All right, this is and doing stuff like that and building our own stuff, or just like if we were whatever, playing tag and things like that, if you have a story to go along with it, I feel like that's where like D&D stole that. They stole childhood, right? Is they took the idea of having a story and then putting dice and some kind of rule set to it, and it works great because, like Justin said, during combat, if you have 6 players and then 6 enemies, you've got 12 people in the initiative tracker. So they have to, even though it's a 6-second moment and everyone is technically going at the same time, if we were all talking at the same time, it would just be as chaotic as on the playground, and like, hey, what did you say? I don't know, let's just keep going. So it would kind of drag down the game. So, and I know for the 3 of us, we're definitely a theater of the mind. One, because it's budget friendly, because up here is free, and you guys do talk a lot about budget friendly ways to do things. And before we get into my next little surprise, this is actually a great segue for you guys to plug your podcast, because you guys do talk a lot. I mean, over 50 episodes. I think you guys are at 53 right now that I've listened to all of them, and it's a lot of good information. So Justin, if you could plug you guys.
Sure. So our podcast is called How to Be a Better DM. You can actually go to betterdungeonmaster.com/listen, and you can find it on any podcast player or whatnot. I would actually recommend starting with episode 2, 5 things every dungeon master should remember. And I think I came up with that episode because they're mistakes that I've made. So be better than me. And actually, we also do one shots in case anyone out there is like, hey, I actually want to get started playing. And Tanner is actually going to be hosting the one shot coming up in September. So again, if you want to sign up for that, you can go to betterdungeonmaster.com/one-shot. It's free. And it's just a nice way to actually get in the game and very low cost, right?
Yeah, awesome. And just as an aside, if you could send me the links, I can put those links in the show notes
For sure.
for that too. So the surprise kind of thing that we talked about a little bit off scene is we do ask our guests to come up with an NPC kind of on the fly. We just do like a little round robin, adding on to the NPC as we go. So Justin, pick our race for an NPC.
Okay. Let's go with human.
Human. Okay.
Very vanilla.
No.
Ew.
Okay. So
What are those?
I'm gonna kind of make it to where the backstory can get a little funky. So we're gonna name this human Axamander. So a little bit more of an elvish style name. Tanner?
Okay. Wait, so am I just continuing with this?
Yeah, just add on.
Okay,
I mean, you can
cool.
you can add a backstory. You can add if you wanted to do and a plot hook, anything like that. We tend to
Class.
just class,
Okay.
whatever you want to do.
If
for
there's
it.
a class, it could be just a merchant. It could be anything you want.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So Axamander, the human Axamander. Let's say that he's a monk. He's a master of
Okay.
martial arts. Has less means than the average person.
Mhm.
Yeah, go from there.
All right, Thorn.
Okay, Axamander. So he became a monk because his parents were killed when he was young. They were killed by orcs, drug away. He played dead underneath a kind of like the bed, and they didn't really see him. So he was able to get away from that. And as he came out of this cabin, their farmhouse they were living in, there just happened to be an old monk just walking down the road. And he kind of picked him up and took him with him. Bone Daddy?
So Axamander the monk, whose parents were killed when he was a child by orcs, who got adopted by a happy or not happy monk that was walking by. He's very knowledgeable. You meet him and he's super knowledgeable about the area that you're in. He could supply pretty much most of the information for any region you want to put him in. He could tell you about the temple. He knows the history, but the only way that you can get information out of him is you have to beat him in a race. And
I like that.
But it's like the twist is like it's the race can be he almost encourages you to cheat at the race. If you cheat at the race, he gives you false information. But he kind of eggs you on. He's like, you can win any way that you think that you can win. And since he's a monk, he's super fast. So
yeah. And then the last thing that we like to give our NPCs is some kind of extra quirk. Justin or Tanner, you can take this one.
Yes. So as part of his extra quirk, I would say he is part of the path of the drunken master. But his quirk isn't that he drinks alcohol. It's that he experiments with shrooms or psychedelic plants. And he's actually found specific plants that allow him to almost kind of phase jump. I guess that's not the right term, but blink from one place to another because he's so fast. And kind of his quirk is that he uses this to play tricks on people in the town that he thinks are a little bit too uppity. He switches their shoes so they have two left shoes. He's just kind of like this he's almost like a fairy, but he's not. He's like this old monk or whatever. I don't even. He might not be old, but that's one of his quirks.
I like it. That's awesome. Well, thank you guys for helping us build this NPC. And just the shameless plug, if you guys like NPCs, listeners, we do an NPC every week on our Patreon. Just go to /This Dungeon is Occupied podcast and get on that Patreon. Bone Daddy, I know you had one last question before we close up and go to
I do. I do. The question that I had was, since we've been talking a lot about Dungeons and Dragons, I was gonna ask you, are there any other tabletop games that you all play? I know that Thorne's actually really fond of World of Darkness. We recently picked up G.I. Joe. I have Star Trek sitting on my shelf, sort of. I mean, I feel like it's an expansion, so I probably have to buy the original. But what other tabletop games do you play?
Well, I'll let Justin talk about Star Wars. That's one that I've played before. Really enjoy it. I also find that Pathfinder 2E, like the second edition of Pathfinder, I find that really fun, like specifically the battle system, because it's essentially adjacent to D&D 5e in certain ways, but they just have gotten a little bit of a different direction, and it's kind of a shake-up for me. One that I haven't played, but I'm interested in is, have you guys ever heard of Delta Green?
No,
I have not.
So it's kind of based off of the Call of Cthulhu kind of dealio system, but they set it more in like, okay, you're a government agency that deals with, it's more modern day, and you kind of deal with stuff like that. And so I think that they just took the Call of Cthulhu, kind of modernized it, and just added some cool spy mechanics, essentially. So yeah, that one I've been looking into, and I think it's really cool.
Nice.
As far as I go, the Star Wars is the only other one I've played, though my brother has helped me create or start creating characters for two separate ones that as a family we've just never been able to do. It was I don't know if you guys are familiar with the author Brandon Sanderson, but he has his Mistborn
My
world.
favorite author. Yes.
He has his Mistborn world, and
Yes.
apparently there's an RPG system that we were gonna play, but again, my family is bad at scheduling things. And then there's also from another author, I don't know if you guys have heard of Jim Butcher.
Oh yeah,
Of course.
Dresden.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a Dresden RPG system.
Yeah.
That sounded super interesting. I think I was gonna be like a fire were panda or something.
Nice.
It was gonna be something
Nice.
crazy. But one, I don't know if it's out there, but if you guys hear of it, I would really love to play. I'm a huge fan of StarCraft, so if there's like a StarCraft RPG, I think that would be awesome. I don't know how the mechanics would work because, but
Yeah.
that'd be really cool.
That's awesome. And
That is awesome.
that actually I came up with a new question for the end. Is there, based off of you guys playing all these different tabletops, is there something that you guys have added, like a homebrew tabletop table rule for your home games in D&D 5e?
Well, I don't know if it came from other games, as it were, but when I started with my current group in my current campaign, and I guess kind of in general, I've always been interested in adventure, right? And I've always wanted to find a way to somehow bridge the gap between D&D and real life, as most people probably do.
Mhm.
So I've started encouraging my players, and I have like these metal coins. I don't even know where I got them, but I said, hey, who would like or inspiration for one specific skill that their character has because you've done something this week, and often I'll have one player say, yeah, I went to jujitsu, so can I have a grappling one? And they have to like turn in the coin
Nice.
to earn that, or they have to turn in the coin when they use that, and another one that I actually started, I did a Spartan race that gave me like this medal,
Mhm.
and I didn't know what to do with it. So I was like, heck, I'm going to award this at the end of this session to the best role player. And then at the end of next session, or during that next session, they can pick one skill and they get advantage on that skill the whole game, the whole session. And then at the end, they have to award it to a different player, and it kind of goes around and it kind
That's
of
cool.
encourages better role playing. And
Mhm.
I've actually seen a big difference because of that.
That's awesome. What about you, Tanner?
Okay. So I haven't implemented these yet, but I've been playing around with the idea just trying to figure out how to do it the right way. One of them, it's actually with Flight and Fantasy Star Wars kind of system, where when you're getting ready for a fight, people will roll, and then if they get like advantages, is how they term it, right?
Mhm.
Then they can actually, the players who get those advantages can add things to the scene, to the environment that they can kind of play with, which I think is great in terms
Yeah.
of combat, because it's like, hey, at the start, the players kind of themselves get to be like, could I add like a few crates over here, or
Mhm.
could I add, who knows what, right?
Right.
I think that's fun. From Call of Cthulhu / Delta Green, I find how bonds work with them very interesting. Where when the players go through something really hard, whether that's like a lot of either physical damage or something traumatic, most often it's like scary or traumatic, then they have a roll, and if they fail that roll, then they take psychological damage, and they can either like take that damage, or they can kind of push it onto one of their relationships or their bonds.
Mhm.
At which point they have to kind of play that out later, when
Yeah.
they're in between adventures. And so it's like, oh, if you're like, if you shunt it onto one of your bonds, then you have to explain to the party like what that looks like. I find that very interesting, and it could totally easily apply to D&D.
So it's like relationship damage.
Yeah, essentially, right? Because you
Yeah.
have to come up with bonds anyway. So it's like, why not make it so that like if they fail or succeed in certain ways, then
Yeah.
like certain relationships either get better or worse, right?
Yeah, trauma affects everybody differently. So
Exactly.
I got one more. I got this, just kind of came to me right now. This is something that I know us three do to each other a lot, and we're actually really good at it. Is like when you're RPing with your players, with your group, like these guys are really big into world building, and I will change their world in the middle of RP.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Just off the fly, because I know they'll take it and roll with it.
Yeah.
Do your players do that to you, and how do you take it when they do? Go ahead, Justin.
Okay.
Yeah.
As far as and this is probably how it goes for every dungeon master, but it's usually with NPCs, right? They take NPCs that should be nothing, and then they're like, you're part of our party now, or whatnot. Or for some reason you're important to the campaign, and you definitely just have to roll with it. Other times, like if it's kind of ridiculous and it just breaks the game, you do have to say like, except no, but this other thing, and you kind of have to like dangle a carrot in another direction. I find it's easier to kind of go yes and when you're not playing from a scripted manual, like a compend. It's not a compendium, it's a module. At least that's how it is for me. Like when I'm having them do like a side quest that's completely unrelated to whatever the book I'm using is about, and they're like, yeah, we do this, and then I'm like, okay, cool, and also a spider shows up just cause, and just add more things to it. But maybe that's a crutch on my part, but yeah.
No, yeah, I totally agree. I think that when you are part of a module, I found that it's hard to yes and what my players want to do, except in small ways, right? But I would love to do that more. In fact, I try and like actively make a setting where I can do that more. But to answer more directly, I think that a lot of players don't realize that that's allowed,
Okay, I agree with that. Yeah. We gotta understand, I've been playing long enough to where I prefer chaos.
Oh yeah.
So I try my hardest to just bring as much chaos to any game I'm in, because in my opinion, chaos brings good RP.
That's true.
So I will take characters and make them in a way that are a little broken and can bring just so much chaos. And to me, it brings a lot of fun. Now I understand a lot of people can't handle it, but it's good for these two guys because they put up with a lot of crap from me. and I know as a DM, it can be difficult and it can be hard. And especially if you're in a module, I do understand that. But my biggest thing, the way I look at it is I'm doing this. So if I want to break this module, I want to break this module.
Yeah.
And I'll just break it. I don't care. But as long as my players are having fun, why not?
To Tanner's point, I think he's incredibly correct in that most players don't know, like they don't know that just because there's Forgotten Realms and there are books about it, they don't understand that the world they're playing in is their own Forgotten Realms, and whatever happens in the story that's what happens. So I think they do definitely take cues, and actually that is probably maybe a failing on my part with my players specifically, of not like instructing them like, hey, like just because I have a story doesn't mean you guys have, like, you don't have to care about this. You can go and we'll do something else,
Definitely. Yeah, that's a thing. That's definitely a thing with all of us. Even when I'm running, if Robbie's running, if Illidine's running, there's never a guarantee we're going to hit every spot that we're ready for. In fact, we usually miss most of it.
I have a binder sitting on my shelf that we have not touched in 3 arcs of my campaign. So, yeah.
I had like a whole section of a forest that I had built that we never got to.
I know.
I have a question. This is one of my favorite topics because it's my favorite thing to play, as I'm a huge horror fan. So like, I'm a huge horror buff. I read a lot of horror. A lot of my games are horror based. So I have a lot of body horror, a lot of like monsters, a lot of like creepy things going on. What are your thoughts on horror and Dungeons and Dragons and DMing? Do you introduce a lot of horror into your games, or how do you feel about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that horror is kind of one of those things. You know how when you have like sweet and sour dishes, that it really like the contrast brings it out. I think it's the exact same. Even though like a lot of my adventures lean towards more lighthearted or silly at some points, I really only am comfortable doing that because I have other moments where I add a lot of suspense, or where the stakes kind of ramp up and it seems like the hope is lost and the players are doing everything they can, but it's like they're coming up short. I think those are classic ways to create, horror, even if it's not like some massive, like wriggling, massive tendrils that's like dragging you into it, right? Yeah. It doesn't always have to be like that for players to feel helpless, which is kind of the core of horror, right?
Exactly. Just the subtle things, the subtleties.
And if I could add, I think a lot of doing horror correctly in large amounts or small is specifically foreshadowing and tension building, like Tanner said. You got to as a story weaver, it's best to think of, in my opinion, horror as kind of a roller coaster, and maybe a reverse roller coaster, because the highest part is always towards the end when there's the most climax, and then there's that big drop, and then you're done. But being able to build the tension and then release it, like Tanner said, like in most horror movies, there's like at least one point of like kind of even if it's super dry, just like a small joke to let you calm down. There's music that's soft where you're like, okay, I think we're safe for a second, and then the music stops, and then you're like, uh-oh, Mm-hmm. And I think being able to use those, not tricks, but techniques to give your players kind of unspoken promises and then fulfill on those promises, but in unexpected ways. And I think that's the hard part.
It's like the video game, right? It's the health pack at the next door, and you're like, I should quick save right now.
Boss level. Uh-oh.
That's not good.
We have just blown through time. And so we will come to a close, but I thank you guys for coming on. And honestly, I'm probably going to be signing up, maybe not for September, but I'm probably going to do a one shot with you guys. And
definitely.
Maybe we can get you guys back on at a later time.
And
we'd love that.
And also, I don't know if you guys would be up for this, but maybe we could have each of you guys be the host of the one shot at one point. That way you guys can meet some new people and expand your reach.
Yeah,
I don't know what do you think about that, Tanner?
Yeah, I'd love that, honestly. You guys obviously have more experience. So, and I also just love seeing how other DMs just their style, because
For sure.
it's all so different.
Yeah.
And anyway, would love to have you.
Oh yeah,
Awesome.
definitely.
Yeah. So listeners, this was the How to Be a Better DM podcast with Justin and Tanner on the This Dungeon is Occupied podcast. And there is plans, that's a mouthful right there, but there is plans for the three of us to go across platform and go and talk on their podcast as well. So make sure you guys look at the notes down at the bottom to check out their podcast as well, and make sure to sign up for their one shot. That's it for this episode. If you guys want to stay on for a little bit, we'll do a behind the scenes content for our Patreon, and that's it. So guys, remember to check your dungeons, because this dungeon is occupied.